Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has signed the 2020 Appropriation Amendment Act into law. The revised budget of 10.8 trillion naira follows the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. President Buhari said all ministries, departments and government agencies will be given 50% of their capital allocation by the end of this month as part of government's commitment to sustain key development priorities. Now, the federal government had sent a revised estimate of 10.5 trillion naira to the National Assembly in May, but that figure was increased to 10.8 trillion naira.
20 amendment budget, which I have just signed into law today, underscores our administration's firm commitment to effectively contain the spread of COVID-19 and protect the lives and livelihood of our people. With these budget amendments, as well as our recently launched 2.3 trillion naira stimulus program, we are well positioned to safeguard the economy. The Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning is in the process of effecting budgetary releases that will ensure that all ministries, departments, and agencies receive at least 50% of their amended capital budget by the end of this month. The Appropriation Repeal and Amendment Act 2020 that I have just signed into law provides for aggregate expenditures of 10.81 trillion naira, which is an increase of 216 billion naira over the level of expenditure initially proposed in 2020 Appropriation Act.
And the implementation of this will start immediately, probably from today. And that means that we will be addressing the challenges occasioned by COVID-19 pandemic, because the essence of the revision was first of all to address the problem of shortfall in revenues, and also secondly to ensure that the challenges posed by the pandemic are addressed, bringing a lot of palliatives and economic opportunities for Nigerians. And this is of interest to us in the National Assembly because we believe that Nigerians at this time need a lot of support, both as individuals and as businesses. Going forward, we believe that the implementation of this year's budget in total will be much higher than we have ever witnessed before, previously, because we have started the implementation from January.
President of the Nigerian Senate there, Ahmed Lawan. Well, for more on this, I am now being joined by Professor Uche Uwaleke, who's a professor of capital markets at the Nasarawa State University, Keffi. And via webex from Lagos, Nnaemeka Obiareri, who's the managing director, Taurus Capital. Good to have you both, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on a Rise interview. Okay, on a Monday like this, one thing that is definitely on the minds of everyone, including the government, is the budget. And we're going to be talking about this now. What do you make of this revised budget to 10.8 trillion? It had been reduced and then again, brought up again because of the impact, the economic impact of coronavirus. What are your thoughts generally about it?
Yes, let's not forget that the budget, the 2020 budget, the original one, was actually signed into law on the 17th of December. So the government has actually meant to, if you like, return the budget cycle, the broken budget cycle, yes, from January to December. So by now, we would have been talking about, 6 months implementation of that budget. But of course, COVID came and oil prices crashed. The initial benchmark was $57 per barrel. But when oil price crashed and OPEC Plus agreed to a production cut, there was need to revise the budget. First, to reduce the benchmark oil price to $28 per barrel now, and the production cut, the output from 1.94 originally planned to 1.8. million barrels.
That seems to differ from my own findings.
With
the oil benchmark from $57, which was the original benchmark, it's now, as at today, $25 per barrel. Okay, good. And oil production from 218 to 1.94.
Yes, the revised budget has $28 per barrel for oil price, and 1.8 million barrels, per day, for output. Yes, because yes, the 1.4 is actually our what we are producing.
Yes.
Our production quota. But if you now add 300,000 condensates, that brings it up to 1.7. But the government is thinking that we can do 1.8 million. Barrels per day. So if you look at the assumptions, the benchmarks, to me, $28 per barrel seems realistic. If you look at the predictions of relatively reliable energy sources like the EIA, and even that of the World Bank, if you look at their forecasts, the oil price isn't likely to drop below $30 per barrel, for the rest of the year. So using 28, in my view, is realistic. And perhaps too ditto for the output. But what, again, that may not turn out to be realistic, in my view, is the exchange rate assumption. The assumption of $360 per barrel, for the not just for this year, even for the next medium-term expenditure framework that is about to also be presented to National Assembly at $360. And of course, the central bank has this plan. Is contained in the economic sustainability plan to unify the exchange rates. So by the time you unify exchange rates, if you bring the current official rate of 360, if you merge it with the I&E window, for example, 38386, okay, that means that we are not likely to have $360 per barrel as the benchmark for for the budget. And what that means is that the government may end up spending
more. 360 to the dollar.
Yes, from 360 to 380. It means the government may end up spending more in naira terms, executing the dollar-denominated component of the budget. Although, again, that will also lead to increase in naira revenues, for the government, because they'll be converting the oil revenues now. Instead of using 360, they'll be using 380.
All right, let me bring in Nnaemeka Obiareri, who is joining us via WebEx, if he aligns with some of your thoughts based on the benchmarks that you have just reeled out. And Nnaemeka, it's good to have you. I'm sure you heard what Prof here, Professor Uche Uwaleke, has just said in terms of, some aspects of it not being totally realistic, but he says $28 oil benchmark is realistic based on what we have on ground now. What are your thoughts generally about this reviewed budget to 10.8 trillion naira?
Ngozi, I seem to agree with him on the oil benchmark is realistic, but if you look at the revenue profile, you discover that the revenue anticipated revenue from the oil sector is about $59, and which is a far cry to the total expenditure that we want to make for the fiscal year 2020, which we have even spent half of it. And the truth of the matter, Ngozi, if you look at this budget critically, especially in the area of the non-oil revenue, the aspect where they attributed revenues, they expect a spike in revenues from other agencies of the federal government by about 100 billion. I don't think it is realistic. And interestingly, if you look at the capital expenditure, it was reduced by about 159 billion naira. But on the recurrent expenditure side, you will discover that it was only tweaked by just 29 billion. So which simply means, I've always said this, budgeting in Nigeria has actually been a case of selling crude oil, collecting revenues from the 111 million working population of Nigerians, and then using it to feed the profligacy and the wastages of less than 1 million Nigerians in the public sector, the politicians, and the civil servants. So if you look at it critically, the budget deficit has widened from 1.9 trillion to almost about 5 trillion. And we are going to borrow most of this to fund consumption. Look at it critically. Revenue from the oil sector is expected to just be about $259 million based on the revised budget. Recurrent expenditure, they didn't tweak it much. You cannot just reduce 25 billion from almost 4.49 trillion naira. It does not make sense. We would have expected under the situation for those in the public sector to tighten the belt. And if you look at it critically, of most of the current expenditure, a major bulk of it goes to salaries and wages. But what of the non-wage aspect of that recurrent expenditure? That is where we expected them to have at least plug in some holes, plug in some leakages, and apply those monies to the critical sectors of the economy that can actually help us to start coming out of the state that we are today post-COVID. So, Ngozi, realistically, I tell you, there is no shifting. There's nothing fundamentally strategic in the revised budget. What we have seen here is a consolidation of the chop and chop mentality. 4.46 trillion that is going to be borrowed. We are going to borrow practically to fund consumption, the profligacy, the wastages, the leakages of less than 1 million people in a country that has over 200 million people, 95 million of them in extreme poverty hole.
All right, I have 1 minute before we go on break, but let me bring this to you, Prof. He just talked about leakages and wastage in this. That is a big challenge when it comes to budgeting. That seems to be where the real problem is. And with a 4.46 trillion borrowing plan, and most of it is going to actually be domestic borrowing, based on what we have on ground now. But I'll let you react to that or respond to it when we come back from this short break. You're watching a Rise interview. Plenty more still ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. Well, as you may have heard, the revised 2020 budget was as a result of the effects of COVID-19 on Nigeria's revenues and the need for new spending on health to meet the health challenges. Now, with the amendments in the budget as well as the recently launched 2.3 trillion naira stimulus program, the country seems ready to safeguard the economy from sliding into recession. But the issue of budget deficit is of major concern to many analysts. Currently, Nigeria's debt service to revenue ratio is about 60, that's 66%, which is above the World Bank's prescribed debt service to revenue ratio of not more than 22.5%. The correspondents say Nigeria is borrowing to fund consumption, and it's just not sustainable for a country struggling with high poverty rate, high misery rate, high unemployment, insecurity, and an economy facing recession, among other challenges. Well, I still have with me right here in the studio Professor Uche Uwaleke, who's a professor of capital markets at the Nasarawa State University, Keffi. And via webex from Lagos, Nnaemeka Obiareri is managing director, Taurus Capital. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for staying with us. Now, let's even talk about that before we come back to that issue of the borrowing plan. 66% would be going into debt servicing. That's a huge chunk of the budget. And just as Nnaemeka said earlier, we're actually borrowing to fund consumption and not necessarily production. That is where the problem is. So it doesn't matter how much good intentions you have with the budget or how brilliant the projections are or assumptions or the benchmarks. With this kind of, how does that really impact on Nigeria, on the economy generally?
Yes, beautiful. It's really a challenge for Nigeria. The real challenge we have, as you mentioned, is that of revenue. Not necessarily the size of the debt stock, of the amount we are owing. If you look at the National Bureau of Statistics, Debt Management Office, the latest release, as of 31st of March 2020, the total debt stock, is about 28.6 trillion. So now, if you place that on our GDP, okay, that really may not be, a problem in the sense that it's still within 30% of GDP. But the real problem is in the debt service to revenue.
Yes.
You're in a situation where you earn $1 and you spend as much as, it's more than
60
no, it's more than that.
It's
more than that. I'll give you an example. the between January and May this year,
Yes.
okay, it's contained in the medium-term expenditure framework. What I'm saying now, between January and May, the government realized about 1.45 trillion naira on a prorated basis. 1.45. Then out of that 1.45, over 1.2 trillion was spent on debt service. So if you work that out, that's over 80%. Okay, so
Yes.
that's really a burden. What we are spending on debt service, is really a burden. There's no doubt, about that. That's why I said that the real challenge is revenue. If we can boost our revenue, okay, the denominator is revenue. If we boost the revenue, then that amount you're paying for
Would
debt
not
service
really
won't be a
of
problem.
concern.
So that's why the challenge for Nigeria should be that of boosting revenue.
So how do we now boost that, our revenue base? A lot has been said about expanding the tax net, and of course focusing on non-oil exports and all of that. But it seems to be a lot more of talk than actually walking the talk.
Yes, I agree with you. But particularly when we are concerned about diversifying the export base, we are saying diversify to agriculture, diversify through solid minerals and so on. Over time, I must admit that it's been more of talk without action. So I think it's time we walked the talk. It's time we really diversified through these other sectors. And mind you,
the mining sector, for example,
yes, agriculture contributes 22% of GDP. So it's a huge chunk of GDP. So that is one viable area we can
compared to the oil sector that's less than 10%.
Oil sector is about 9% of GDP, employs less than 5% of the population, and yet it is one sector that's accounting for about 90% of our forex. So back to the budget. Let me say that the huge deficit we are having in this year's budget is necessitated by the need to put in money in the economy and contain not just the health crisis, but also the make sure that livelihoods are not impaired.
Yes.
So that's why we're having the huge deficit. Ordinarily, you would say because of COVID-19, because of the decline in revenue, we should also reduce spending. But if you reduce spending, we run the risk of entering into severe economic recession. Okay, as you know, the IMF had already projected that the Nigerian economy will decline, will shrink by 5.4% in 2020. The National Bureau of Statistics recently revised their own again to 4.2. So when you hear some of these numbers, including that of the World Bank, okay, the only way to avert the looming problem is to put money into the economy, and that's why the government is also talking about injecting 2.3 trillion naira as COVID response.
Stimulus, economic stimulus,
including the one that's going to come from.
And I actually have a breakdown here, but let me bring in Emeka Obiareri. Emeka, now. It seems what the Nigerian government is doing aligns with what the IMF is advising, that governments should be careful in cutting spending, as this could just, throw countries, including Nigeria, into the deep end when it comes to recession. So we're doing the right thing by actually, we're raising the budget, so to speak, based on the impact of the coronavirus. Would you applaud the Nigerian government for that? And what impact really do you think this would have in the short term, in the medium term, and of course in the long term, as we look towards post-COVID?
Because the question is spending towards end. What kind of spending are we looking at here? The Prof actually pointed out one critical area that we have always ignored. We've continued to mount diversification. We've continued to talk about it, but we are not actually doing it. I will address one issue now before we get to this. Because let me just give you an illustration of the kind of spending that we are doing in Nigeria. Over the last 2 weeks, there has been this squabble between the National Assembly and the Minister of State for Employment, Festus Keyamo. What was the issue? 52 billion naira budgeted to take care of 774,000 Nigerians in 3 months. They call it Special Works Program. pay them 20,000 the first month, the second month, the third month, 46 billion gone, and then the remaining will be used to do procurement of only them that know what they are talking about. Now, Ngozi, that is spending, but that is not the kind of spending that we're looking at if we want to actually save the economy and stimulate Nigeria. Prof pointed out to one critical area that we have always ignored. We've continued to map diversification of agriculture. Prior to 1966, agriculture used to be the mainstay of Nigerian economy, 67%. If you look at countries like Netherlands has a landmass that is almost the same as Benue State. But Netherlands produce and export over $100 billion worth of agric and agro commodities annually. Nigeria has the right demographics, the population, blessed by nature, to match Netherlands if we put the right structures in place. Ask me, what would we have done with this 52 billion if we had people that are creative, people that are thinking, and not people that are after sharing money, swallowing it and wasting it on profligacy? That 52 billion will have actually been used to even increase agriculture. I did an article which I even shared with at least 58 members of the National Assembly on how we can rightly apply that 52 billion to help the economy through mechanized agriculture. 774 local government areas in Nigeria. If you apply 45 million naira to raise the basic mechanized agric equipment in every of the 70 local government area, in 774 local government area in Nigeria, it will just take us about 36 billion naira to set up those mechanized agricultural clusters in all the local government area in Nigeria. Each cluster will employ at least 20 Nigerians that will earn nothing less than 60,000 naira every month into the longer term.
All right.
The remaining amount of
Nnaemeka, unfortunately, not enough time to explore all of those. You would like to say something, but unfortunately, we don't even have not even a second for that. We'll have to leave it there. Professor Uche Uwaleke, thank you so much for joining us. Nnaemeka Obiareri, it's been a pleasure